how does the fault?
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
You were not able to serve in Vietnam because of the bone spur condition in your feet. Do you wish you'd been able to serve? Would you like to have served your country?
Well, I was never a fan of that war, I'll be honest with you. I thought it was a terrible war. I thought it was very far away. Nobody ever, you're talking about Vietnam, and at that time, nobody ever heard of the country. Today, they're doing very well. In fact, on trade, they are brutal. They're very brutal. They're great negotiators. They're great business people. But nobody heard of Vietnam, and they're saying, what are we doing? So many people dying. What is happening over there? So I was never a fan. This isn't like I'm fighting against Nazi Germany. We're fighting against Hitler. And I was like a lot of people. Now, I wasn't out in the streets marching. I wasn't saying, I'm going to move to Canada, which a lot of people did. But no, I was not a fan of that war. That war was not something
would
that
you like
we
to
should
have
have been
served
involved
generally, perhaps in another?
I would not have minded that at all. I would have been honored, but I think I make up for it right now. $700 billion I gave last year, and then this year $716 billion. And I think I'm making up for it rapidly because we're rebuilding our military at a level that it's never seen before.
President Bone Spurs says that he's making up for the fact that he dodged the Vietnam draft because of how he treats the military now. And the way he treats the military now is he's giving them summer jobs painting a border fence in Mexico. I'm not kidding. So here's this man lying about, I had bone spurs. He doesn't even remember. He said, you'll look it up. Which foot did you have bone spurs? You'll look it up. He used his daddy's money to get him out of the draft in Vietnam. And, he did get to, he was in college kind of a thing. You got a deferral, until you finished. Then he finished. And then he said he had bone spurs. And, of course, the daughter of the doctor that wrote the note for his bone spur diagnoses, he said that his dad asked him to do it for him, Fred did, as a favor to Fred, and the doctor did it. So, but it's an amazing thing. Vietnam is so far away. Nobody knew where that country was. Can I just say thank you to the Afghanistan vets who thought it was so far away and didn't exactly know where it was, weren't drafted, and volunteered to go and fight this 17-year long freaking war in multiple deployments. Thank you for going someplace where it's so far away and you didn't know where it was. And the same thing with Iraq. Thank you. It's very far away. I remember before the Iraq war, nobody knew the difference between Iraq and Iran. Nobody knew the difference. To this day, some people don't know the difference between Iraq and Iran. So here's what. I get a pass for being a draft dodger. I get a pass because I treat the military so well now. This was reported out last night. Our troops, he sent like 5,000 of them down to the border because he declared a national emergency. And you know what? Apparently the emergency is, do you know what it is? Apparently the emergency is an ugly fence. Yeah, because he is tasking 3,000 active duty troops and 2,000 National Guardsmen to paint a freaking fence. There's an actual email from DHS, and it says that the painting by the troops is, and this is the quote, to improve the aesthetic appearance of the wall. Our military is literally being used to put lipstick on Trump's pig. But he respects the military. Oh, he respects them so much that, if it had been a different place, if it wasn't so far away, I mean, he knew where France was, this is just so. Remember, our troops are at the border because he declared an emergency, and the emergency apparently is an ugly freaking fence. I don't know what kind of service medal you could earn. Maybe we have a Tom Sawyer medal now. I don't know. the Tom Sawyer Brigade. They're all going to be painting the irony is that if Trump was building a wall privately, he'd be using Mexican immigrants to do it. Yes. God, he's a douche. I can't stand it. But today is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And Trump, yesterday we were having a little discussion, not much, of what the D in D-Day stands for. And of course, no one really knows, but people who suspect that history is correct, yeah, us people, suspect that D stands for day. And that yesterday was D-1. Right? And that today is D-Day, and tomorrow would be D+1 day. The next day would be D+2 day. And because this entire effort did not culminate in a day, this was the Pathfinder's landing. This was the landing of the people who were tasked with storming that beach. This is like the 101st Airborne, the 82nd Airborne, storming that beach in order to put flares and lights on the ground so that the troops coming behind them would be able to see where they were going. It was to light the way. And of course, we had a very enormous job that we had a segregated military back then. Can you believe? Yeah, America. This is what he means. Make America great again. He means that. Segregate the military. I mean, it's just so sad. So anyway, we had this amazing battalion of African-American guys, and they were tasked with setting off balloons, these big giant balloons tied to cables that were buried in trenches. And the balloons were filled with hydrogen so that if, the Luftwaffe, if they flew, they would crash into and they would, bomb themselves. It was brilliant. It was just an amazing thing. So it's been 75 years since D-Day, and everybody is like, what's the D for? And, the sad part is, I think our president thinks the D stands for Donald. And that's just a shame. Some people think it stands for disembarkation. No, it actually literally just means day. But, Donald Trump shows just how far we've fallen in 75 years. That's the sad part. I mean, the British twittered. Have you seen any of the British twitters? I mean, it's you gotta love their sense of humor, man. Take a look at this one. Then I just picked out one. You could do this all day, but these are just so great. Check this guy out.
To announce today that we have reached a deal to end the shutdown.
Because it's shut down. That's not meaning it's shut down.
I will build a great, great wall on our southern border. And I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words.
You gotta love the Brits, man. They got the best sense of humor. And they stood with us all day yesterday. I mean, Trump didn't see he didn't see the protests. He only saw cheering crowds. Well, there are actual photos of the cheering crowds that were there for Obama and empty streets for Donald Trump. And then nothing but protests everywhere. Protests with, Trump sitting on a golden toilet tweeting, blimps of baby Trump, blimps of mini baby Trumps in the BBC. We showed you a whole bunch. But here we are 75 years later. And, in just the last 2.5 years, we have destroyed, or he's trying to destroy, the very Western alliance that was built after World War II that kept us from ever having another world war. All right, it's like amazing. 75 years ago, we literally made this massive sacrifice to liberate Europe from fascism, and then we let it slip right through our own back door. Or front door. Yeah, he walked right in. Like I said, America will never, ever be destroyed from without. It will only ever be destroyed from within. And every second that this man is mumbling through a mandatory speech about the Allies, every minute he's not mumbling through some written thing, he is undermining that same alliance. It's so amazing. He's attacked the European Union. He's attacked NATO. His whole nationalist agenda is designed to prop up dictatorships a la 1944. And yet on Fox News, I'm the dictator. We're the dictator. We're Hitler.
All things Randy at RandyRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
And, you know, you're going to be faced with a choice in 2020, and the president is exactly right. He said there are no Winston Churchills. But, you know, I do see quite a few Benito Mussolinis in the Democratic field.
Ooh.
And now it's about getting the trains to run on time in Hawaii, because they're talking about banning airplanes in 10 years. The Democrat is pushing a radical agenda. We're not going to turn far to the left in 2020. We're going to stick with the progress we've made.
Wow. I would imagine that you'll get some pushback on any comparisons to Mussolini, but I do understand the socialism aspect of that. So let's just stay in the lane of the money, if you will.
Yeah, no, look at what they're proposing.
Okay.
Socialized medicine, a complete takeover of healthcare, eliminating private insurance, which over 180 million Americans have. This so-called Green New Deal, there's nothing new about it. It's the old failed socialist policies of the 20th century, a complete takeover of what you drive, what you eat, how many kids you have. It's completely a radical agenda. So when I look at the Democratic field and Elizabeth Warren's getting lauded for saying, I have a plan for that, those words are terrifying, actually, to millions of Americans, because we don't want the government to have another plan over our life.
Okay. So actually inventing new technology, deploying a radical, change in how we fuel ourselves, making some of the most heinous, corrupt, autocratic societies main source of wealth worthless in the meantime, as we innovate our way into a new green technology economy, which, by the way, would create 1.2 million new jobs, is Mussolini all over again. How do they even get there in their heads? All right, look, here's the thing. Elizabeth Warren had a town hall last night, and Elizabeth Warren has the most amazing story. I think it's frightening. I think it's very frightening to the Trump pansies that a woman like Elizabeth Warren is gaining traction. I think it's perfectly frightening to them that this is the case. Why? Elizabeth Warren is not an elitist. Elizabeth Warren is not an establishment candidate. Elizabeth Warren was a private person who went to a commuter college, as it was called. I think it cost $50 a semester to go. When she was a young woman, was able to put herself through college, did so well, she actually got herself into Harvard, got an education in bankruptcy law, actually taught bankruptcy law at Harvard. She's from Oklahoma. She's an Okie. Everybody likes to forget Elizabeth Warren is an Okie. She's from Oklahoma. She raised her kids. She did it in a time when there was absolutely no childcare available. She did it in a time where it was, just almost impossible for a woman to get into Harvard. And she was then appointed by the Obama administration because she saw what a fixed, rigged system bankruptcy was for individuals, and yet for guys like Donald Trump, they could exploit it to their benefit. They could, create these deductions for themselves and keep borrowing money from banks, even though they had 5-6 bankruptcies on their records. But that was not available to the little guys. So she was actually tapped by Obama to create and head up a consumer protection agency to protect homeowners from exactly what Republicans do to small people, to the little people in bankruptcy, right? And then after she was created and actually headed the Consumer Protection Agency, which is now a part-time job for Mick Mulvaney, she ran for the Senate and won. That's her story. That is an amazing story of an outsider who, literally saw what's wrong with our system and attempted in her own individual way, with an abundance of smarts and energy, to fix it. And that's why she's so frightening. Okay, let's just talk. Let's just play the little piece of Elizabeth Warren talking about how an investment in infrastructure could work and what it would look like and what it would create in the United States.
The thing is, you can't just wave your arms. You know that. It's that you really got to have a plan. And I do have a plan on this. So here's how it starts. I'm looking to make about 1.2 million new jobs. New jobs that are good jobs, that are jobs in manufacturing, that are going to be good union jobs, the kind of jobs on which people can build a future. And here's the idea behind it. Right now, we got a climate crisis in this country and in this world. It threatens us all. Worldwide, there's about a $23 trillion market for fighting back against climate change. And that's going to mean a lot of research, a lot of innovation, and a lot of manufacturing to push back against that. My plan is to make America the leader in that fight. We double down, triple down, go tenfold on the research from where it's been before. And we say to anybody who wants to use that research, who wants to innovate around it, good for you. You can do it. But you have to produce the products right here in the United States of America. You have to build those jobs here.
That sucks. Sure, she's just like Mussolini, isn't she? That just sucks. Who would want to increase research and development into, getting away from fossil fuels and powering ourselves with green, renewable fuel sources, create 1.2 million new jobs here in America, and say to companies who benefit from our investment in research and development into, something called science. I never heard of it. Have you? Or not lately. I haven't heard of science lately. Yeah, but who would want to make that kind of an investment and then say to companies that benefit from that research and development that you have to create your product here in America? Who would want to do that? I mean, that's so completely fascist. Here's a little more on it.
One more part is a commitment to spend about $1.5 trillion in making our federal government go green. It's buy the products, and here again, it's going to be all buy American. We're going to change our fleet of cars. We're going to bring in new products. We're going to change what happens with our buildings. And look what that does. That not only helps improve on the climate front, but it creates demand. Demand to keep those factories open, demand to expand those factories and those jobs. And then there's one more part to it. And that is, look, even if we manage to go entirely carbon neutral by 2030, we're only about 20% of the world on this. There's another 80%. And that's where the worldwide demand for change is. So huge market, $23 trillion market. Right now, the Chinese spend 100 times what we spend here in the United States marketing their manufactured products around the world. I say we're going to spend that money in the United States to market American products around the world. That's how we're going to produce these jobs.
Yeah, no. It just sucks. That blows.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844. Do you believe still that impeachment is the right path forward, and why or why not?
Yes, I do. And understand this, Aaron. I didn't decide to run for president so that I could get into a big debate over impeachment. I decided to run because I was going to beat that guy, right? Straight up. But the deal is, the Mueller report came out, and the afternoon it came out, I sat down and started reading it. And I read it all afternoon, and I read it all night, and I read it into the next morning, all 448 pages. I got to the end, and there were three things that are just, man, there's no avoiding them. Part one, a hostile foreign government attacked our 2016 elections for the purpose of getting Donald Trump elected. Part 2. Then candidate Donald Trump welcomed that help. And Part 3, when the federal government tried to investigate Part 1 and Part 2, Donald Trump, as president, delayed, deflected, moved, fired, and did everything he could to obstruct justice. If he were any other person in the United States, based on what's documented in that report, he would be carried out in handcuffs. Now, I took an oath of office, not to Donald Trump, not to any president. I took an oath of office to the Constitution of the United States of America. And that Constitution says no one is above the law, including the President of the United States.
She's amazing, okay? There is no question about it. She is actually coming from behind. I will say that there is a Quinnipiac poll today that shows that Joe Biden beats Donald Trump. Yes, it's super, super, super stupid to look at polls this early. There's no question about it. But, America being what it is, and we like to poll. Who doesn't like a good poll? Shows that Biden beats Trump in freaking Texas. In Texas, you know how many electoral votes there are in Texas? 38. 38. You ever look at the infrastructure in Texas? You ever look out at the highway system in Texas, why it's all crazy and it's like whirly twirly in the sky and you got roads over roads over roads. That's because the delegation in Texas is so freaking huge. There are 38 people in the Texas delegation and they each fight for infrastructure money for Texas. And that's why you got crazy, woo circles and loops. And navigating around Texas is almost as bad as California. But okay, that's why. But you have 38 electoral votes on the line in Texas. And if there is any Democrat who can beat Donald Trump as of today, it is Joe Biden. Elizabeth Warren is only trailing Donald Trump in Texas by 1 percentage point. 1. It's 45-46, Warren Trump. Biden is 48-44 in Texas. People are sick of this man. People have had it with him. They are embarrassed by him. They understand he's a con man. They get what he is. They understand what he is. And when you listen to people like Elizabeth Warren, who has a plan for that. Okay, I think that should be her campaign slogan. I have a plan for that, because she does. She's a policy person. That is what she is. She's the adult in the room here. Okay, she's like Trump in that she has ideas, but the difference is hers are good ones. Hers are well thought out. It's the opposite of the last president. It's the opposite of Donald Trump. And if voters are looking for whoever is the opposite of the last president, whoever is the opposite of 4 years of an incompetent idiot, they are gravitating toward Elizabeth Warren. And I say go for it. You got to fall in love now. You have to fall in love during the primaries. And whoever the nominee is, then you fall in line. We haven't had the first debate yet. It is coming up in 2 weeks. The first debate is here in Miami, if I'm not mistaken, right? Do you know the date? I don't know the date. But it's soon. And we will see a real debate between our Democratic nominees. And I guarantee you anybody on that stage is going to have better ideas than Donald Trump has. Like sending our troops down to the border for a month in the middle of the blistering, sweltering Texas summer to paint a fence. What kind of idea is that? To paint a fence. Senator Dick Durbin, who's a great senator from Illinois, he confirmed the plan last night. He said, quote, DHS informed Congress today that troops are going to spend the next month painting the border wall, and the primary purpose is to improve the aesthetic appearance. This is a disgraceful misuse of taxpayer dollars. Our military has more important work to do than making Trump's wall beautiful. You think? According to Pence, they're all going to war, right? I mean, oh, they love our troops. They love them.
It is a virtual certainty that you will fight on a battlefield for America at some point in your life.
Oh, my God.
You will lead soldiers in combat.
Perpetual war, everybody.
It will happen.
It will happen.
Some of you will join the fight against radical Islamic terrorists in Afghanistan.
It's too far away.
And Iraq.
Too far away.
Some of you will join the fight on the Korean Peninsula and in the Indo-Pacific.
What's the Indo-Pacific?
Where North Korea continues to threaten the peace and an increasingly militarized China challenges our presence in the region.
But the president loves them.
Some of you will join the fight in Europe, where an aggressive Russia seeks to redraw international boundaries by force.
But he loves Putin.
And some of you may even be called upon to serve in this hemisphere.
What? What?
When that day comes,
what?
I know you will move to the sound of the guns.
Oh, my God.
Do your duty.
Oh. He loves our troops. They're just, they're cannon fodder for this hemisphere. What, they're going to round up, immigrant children and haggard Honduran housewives? What? Well, all we know is that Trump has sent 5,000 troops down to the border in the middle of the hot Texas summer to paint a fence. To paint a freaking fence. This is sick. This is really twisted. Meanwhile, we have real people with real ideas, and not just what they're against, but they've got policy prescriptions for the... You know why the Rust Belt is red? Because rust is red. We want to actually... I was saying to Howard last night, I go, you know what the answer is for the Rust Belt? You know what the answer is for like Ohio and Pennsylvania and the coal miners of West Virginia? The answer is to go back to the future. Meaning, if you go back to manufacturing, if you go back to, ingenuity, if you go back to using these places as places where American fuels are created yet again, the Rust Belt will not be rusty anymore. If you could just, and that's why she went to Indiana, if you could just tell the Rust Belt that the future is really the past, that the future is in a 21st century fuel, and that they could have their lifestyle back, maybe we could turn it blue.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
This year has been tough for Indiana farmers. Heavy rain and flooding has saturated the soil, making it impossible to plant crops. And that's on top of Trump's trade war. In 2017, Indiana farmers exported over $1 billion of crops, like soybeans and grains, to China. A year later, that dropped by 78%.
Oh, my God.
And now Trump just bailed out farmers for the second time in 6 months.
Oh, my God.
When you think about the previous aid package and then $16 billion now, does that signal to farmers that Trump is good for farming?
I mean, you could put a monkey in charge and he can write checks.
I have directed Secretary Perdue to provide $16 billion in assistance to America's farmers and ranchers. China has openly stated they're going to use the farmer. The reason is because I got the farmers' votes. You look at a map, it's all red, meaning Republican, meaning Trump.
So when you hear the president talking about $16 billion in aid, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Crumbs on the floor, food stamps, welfare.
I
don't know.
You don't like any of those things?
No. I mean, as a farmer, we want to be independent, and the perception of the public, it doesn't look good. We feel like, we don't need it.
So the trade war may have complicated things, but also Mother Nature hasn't been cooperating with you guys, right?
We can't get a crop in the ground. We've had above average rainfall starting with a hurricane last September, and we just have not dried out. I saw a stat that the United States has had the most rainfall ever in the last 8 months.
Oh! With all the uncertainty around weather and global trade, Malk set aside a large part of his farm to develop innovative farming methods.
We're all trying to work the best with what we have, but it's different than it was 25 years ago. But I think that a lot of our policies are just trying to preserve and protect old ways instead of letting innovation happen and flourish.
2020 is around the corner. Will you be voting for Donald Trump again?
Most likely no.
Yeah, that's sweeping the nation. That whole idea of most likely no is sweeping the nation. And the idea that Trump is talking about more tariffs on Mexico now. You know what Mexico did? They gave Donald Trump, because yesterday they had some sort of a get together, a meeting to discuss his ridiculous attack on our largest trading partner, who is Mexico, and these ridiculous tariffs that are supposed to kick in on Monday. And of course, Trump does not have the legal right to impose tariffs. Only Congress does, which is really disgusting to even, if you start at the basic floor of what he's doing and how it's rooted in illegality and a read of the Constitution that is absolutely unconstitutional. And then you progress to who's going to pay the price for his ridiculous threat to Mexico, our largest trading partner, who, if you decimate Mexico's economy, you're going to get more Mexicans coming to the United States. And that's not even what we're seeing here at the border. What we're seeing at the border is Central Americans from the Northern Triangle. Okay, you're seeing Hondurans, less people from Salvador now, because Salvador actually was given money to police themselves to try and tamp down on the gang violence that's there. Well, Trump's now cutting off aid to El Salvador, aid to Guatemala, and aid to Honduras to help them with oversight, fix the gang violence problem that they have. See, the reason why people flee, this is just in a nutshell. The reason why people are leaving places like Tegucigalpa, which is the capital of Honduras, okay, is because the gangs come to your house, right? And they say something to you like, okay, Mrs., here's what we're going to do. You pay us, or next Tuesday we rape your daughter. That's why mothers take their children and flee. And instead of focusing on the problem in these little countries that are close enough for us to find on a map, which Donald Trump, Vietnam was too far, Afghanistan not so far, I don't know, it's like almost as far. But the reason why Donald Trump doesn't focus on the issue that's causing the migration is because Donald Trump wants the issue itself. So now he wants to look all strong, even though he's, small. He's very small in spirit. He's very small in dignity. He's small in valor. The man is small. He's a coward. And the reason why he doesn't focus on the cause of the problem, or even mitigating the problem by sending more judges down to the border to hear the claims of asylum. Instead, he blames Mexico. This is just like, when the Saudi hijackers, 15 of those 19 hijackers that plowed airplanes into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon and were forced to crash land and kill everybody on board in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Those people were from Saudi Arabia. And then we attacked Afghanistan. This is the same mindset of attacking Mexico for problems that are in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. I mean, it makes no sense to anybody who will think about it. And that is why no matter who is our nominee, no matter who rises to the top after the first debate, which, by the way, we looked up, it'll be the 26th and 27th of June. It's a Wednesday and a Thursday. Okay, in 2 weeks, we will have debates. And we have so many candidates that it will take 2 nights to hear from everybody. And what a breath of freaking fresh air that will be after smelling this rancid guy. When you hear the adults in the room talk about real problems and real solutions for them. You will not hear one single Democrat back up or threaten to increase tariffs on Mexico in order to solve the problem of immigration from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. You will not hear that, because they are adults in the room. And the sheer bravery of Elizabeth Warren going to Fort Wayne, Indiana, it was a thing of beauty. Because not everybody there is going to accept her ideas, without discussing. Not everybody, but at least she's an adult who literally thinks about problems and how to solve them. Instead of, did you see? You'll see. I don't even want you to watch this tonight. I'll just play you a little clip. This is really, really grotesque. Okay. Today, Donald Trump sat in the Normandy cemetery. Oh, I tweeted out my father's grave today because I just wanted you to see that of all the things my dad was, he didn't want those things on his gravestone. He didn't want loving father. He didn't want husband. He wanted only to be remembered, because this changed everything about the quality of his life. It changed everything about being a husband for him. It changed everything about being a father for him. And that was his service on 3 continents during World War II. Okay, my father will never, ever be the same after his service. But he didn't regret doing it. But he knew his whole life had giant holes blown in it because of what he saw and what he relived long after the service was over. So on his grave, if you go to at Randi Rhodes on Twitter, you'll see the only thing that's on my father's grave is a Jewish star, because his Judaism was very important to him, and World War II Army. That's it. That's all he wanted on his stone, and that's all we put on there. Trump sat at the cemetery in Normandy, where there's almost 10,000 bodies buried. The Allies were Britain, Canada, and the United States. This was not about making America great again. This was not about making America great at all. This was about liberating the world from fascism with our allies. An idiot boy sat there today at the cemetery and ragged on Robert Mueller with the tombstones, with the crosses, the white crosses behind him, talking to snot-nosed, whining, complaining Laura Ingraham about Robert Mueller being a fool. And the interview took so long that the commemoration at Normandy was delayed so he could complete his appearance on Laura Ingraham's Fox News show. He bitched about Nancy Pelosi. He bitched about Robert Mueller, saying he made a fool out of himself, and he called the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, a disaster while sitting among those dead soldiers.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
1 second.
And if he testifies still, before you said you didn't care, Mueller testifies.
Let me tell you, he made such a fool out of himself.
Look at that.
The last time because what people don't report is the letter he had to do to straighten out his testimony, because his testimony was wrong. But Nancy Pelosi, I call her Nervous Nancy. Nancy Pelosi doesn't talk about it. Nancy Pelosi's a disaster, okay? She's a disaster. And let her do what she wants. You know what? I think they're in big trouble.
That was the President of the United States sitting at the Normandy Cemetery among the headstones of the fallen, the men who paved the way for us to gain a foothold in continental Europe 75 years ago today, to beat back fascism throughout the world. Sitting among the headstones, all he could think about is himself. like a tin pot dictator with some terrified secret, that was disgusting. And you know what just happened during the news break? During the news break, they released, as ordered by Emmett Sullivan in the court that is overseeing the Michael Flynn case, the audio of the voicemail from John Dowd, and I played you a clip of John Dowd lying on the TV yesterday, right? John Dowd was calling the lawyer for Donald Trump, for Michael Flynn, sorry. And John Dowd was a lawyer for Trump, and he was calling Michael Flynn's attorney. And he left a message like an idiot. I don't know any lawyers that do this, okay? The lawyers I know, if they have a substantive conversation with you that they need to have about a matter pending, especially in a court of law, let alone in Congress or, something of national security, they're not going to leave a detailed message on your machine. They're going to say, "Hi, Rob, this is John. Give me a call. I can be reached on my cell or my home phone number is." Idiot boy John Dowd leaves this long, detailed message on the machine of Michael Flynn's attorney. Now, I have it. I will play it for you. But first, I want to play you John Dowd on Sean Hannity's show yesterday so I can show you how they lied.
Well, I had an obligation as counsel to the president to find out what was going on. And I'm so glad Judge Sullivan ordered the transcript because we now know the truth. And we also know that this entire report by Mueller is a fraud. And we're going to find more of these things. Isn't it ironic that this man who kept indicting and prosecuting people for process crimes committed a false statement in his own report? By taking out half my words, they changed the the tenor, and the contents of that conversation with Robert Kellner. And it's an outrage, and there's probably more of it.
Add to this, Professor Dershowitz, that in and of itself is an outrage because you're literally changing the exact meaning of what the counselor said. Number one. Number two, how embarrassing for Mueller last week to say, "Oh, I couldn't indict on obstruction because of a Department of Justice rule that doesn't allow or questions the ability of him to make a determination as it relates to whether you can or cannot indict a sitting president." And then you look at the team that he put around him with Andrew Weissman and company, all chronicled in Sidney Powell's License to Lie. And Professor, you care about civil liberties. I care about civil liberties. Every American needs to be concerned in all this.
This is a very, very serious issue. The distortion of the Dowd quote is very serious, especially since, remember that a report by a special counsel is always going to be one-sided. Therefore, you have to trust it because the other side doesn't have a chance to look at it and show what's wrong with it the way it would in an adversarial situation. If a lawyer made a representation like that to a court and said, "This is the quote," and left out the crucial context, which showed, as John said, that what he discussed was not only absolutely proper, but obligatory for a counsel when you have a joint defense agreement to find out exactly what's likely to be used against your client.
Okay. I'm going to play you the phone call. Here's what you want to hear. They assert that Mueller mischaracterized the tone, tenor, and purpose of the phone call between Trump's lawyer, John Dowd, the unfortunate-looking man of the two. Okay, so that's saying a lot in that particular clip. And the fact that they were in a joint defense agreement. And so John Dowd was obligated to call Flynn's attorney, Robert Kellner. When you hear the transcript, you're going to hear, I will read it to you, and then I will play it for you. He's going to say, "Hey, Rob, this is John again. Maybe I'm sympathetic. I understand your situation, but let me see if I can't state it in starker terms. If you have, and it wouldn't surprise me, if you've gone on to make a deal with and work with the government, I understand that you can't join the defense, the joint defense. This is where Dershowitz and John Dowd lied. They were not part of a joint defense agreement. In fact, Dowd was calling because they couldn't be part of a joint defense agreement. He said, so I understand if you can't join the joint defense. So that's one thing. If, on the other hand, there's information that implicates the president, then we've got a national security issue, or maybe a national security issue. I don't know. Some issue we got to deal with, not only for the president, but for the country. So, then, we need some kind of heads up, just for the sake of protecting all of our interests, if we can, without you having to give up any confidential information. So if it's the former, then, remember what we've always said about the president and his feelings toward Flynn, and that still remains. But, well, in any event, let me know, and I appreciate you listening and taking the time. Thanks, pal. That is not a mischaracterization of what he's doing there, and the lie that was told yesterday that he had an obligation because they were in a joint defense agreement. That's just not true. It wasn't true yesterday. It's not true today. It wasn't true when Strzok interviewed Flynn at the beginning of the counterintelligence investigation. So here's the actual tape, okay?
Hey, Rob. This is John again. Maybe I'm sympathetic. I understand your situation, but let me see if I can state it in starker terms. If you have, it wouldn't surprise me if you've gone on to make a deal and work with the government. I understand that you can't join a joint defense. That's one thing. If, on the other hand, there's information that implicates the president, then we've got a national security issue, or maybe a national security issue. I don't know. Some issue we've got to deal with, not only for the president but for the country. So, then we need some kind of heads up, just for the sake of protecting all interests if we can, without you having to give up any confidential information. So, and if it's the former, then, remember what we've always said about the president and his feeling toward Flynn. That still remains. But in any event, let me know. And I appreciate your listening and taking the time. Thanks, pal.
That's the call. It was not mischaracterized. They were not in a joint defense agreement. You are repeatedly lied to, so that the president, who is a traitor to this nation, can accuse the people who investigated the attack on our country by the Russian military intelligence with the help of the former campaign manager Paul Manafort handing off polling data, and Michael Flynn, who actually went to Russia and sat at a table with Vladimir Putin. And now we have the FBI's 302, the interview that Strzok did with Flynn. We have it, showing that the President of the United States not only welcomed the help, but expected to benefit and encouraged it and participated in it.
Oh! All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Hey, Rob. This is John again. Maybe I'm sympathetic. I understand your situation, but let me see if I can state it in starker terms. If you have, it wouldn't surprise me if you've gone on to make a deal and work with the government. I understand that you can't join a joint defense. That's one thing.
Okay.
If, on the other hand, there's information that implicates the president, then we've got a national security issue, or maybe a national security issue. I don't know. Some issue we've got to deal with, not only for the president but for the country. So, then we need some kind of heads up, just for the sake of protecting all interests if we can, without you having to give up any confidential information. So, and if it's the former, then, remember what we've always said about the president and his feeling toward Flynn. That still remains. But in any event, let me know, and I appreciate your listening and taking the time. Thanks, Paul.
What a freaking liar. He sat there and lied to our face. And I knew he was lying to our face because, you read the Mueller report, this is in there. Not the entire transcript, but the fact that he said, if the president, we might have a national security problem if Flynn did what he said, if the president is implicated. I mean, you got a lawyer who's so stupid. I mean, they're all doing it. They're texting each other, and the lawyers are leaving messages on machines. And oh, God. So now we have the actual FBI's interview of Michael Flynn, okay? It's partially redacted. There's just a few redactions in it. It's not very long. It was the 302 is sort of a summary. It's of the deliberative material of the information that the officer, the FBI agent, was able to glean from a sit down with Michael Flynn. All right, and I'm just gonna read it to you. Something's redacted at the very beginning. I don't know what. But it says on January 24th, 2017, Deputy Assistant Director Peter Strzok. This is why they attacked Peter, okay? Peter Strzok and blank interviewed United States National Security Advisor Michael T. Flynn, date of birth, and then his date of birth is redacted, at his office at the White House. After being advised of the identities of the interviewing agents and the nature of the interview, Flynn provided the following information. Something's redacted. Flynn's first invitation to Russia occurred when he was the director of Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. Flynn was the first DIA director to be invited to GRU headquarters. So that's KGB, right? During that 4-day trip in 2013, he participated in a leadership development program at Russian Military Intelligence, GRU headquarters. Flynn received proper authorization within the U.S. government prior to conducting the trip. Flynn could not recall if he met Russia's ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak, during this trip. Flynn described the Russians as very appreciative of his visit. During this trip to Russia as DIA director, Flynn first met the then GRU director, Igor Sergin. Following the trip, Flynn and Sergin continued their relationship on at least one occasion through video teleconference and were planning a visit for Sergin to travel to the United States on February 28, 2014. Russia invaded Crimea in the weeks prior to Sergin's planned trip. Sergin's trip was canceled, and Flynn had no further contact with the GRU director. Flynn described Sergin as having common ground with Flynn in that they had similar backgrounds. Their sons were the same age, and they had a connection in fighting terrorism. Sergin had scars from Chechnya, and they shared stories about Afghanistan. Flynn stated he called Ambassador Kislyak following Sergin's death in Lebanon early last year to express his condolences. Flynn described Sergin as someone the U.S. could work with. Flynn said he was not really part of the Trump campaign at the time of this call to Kislyak. Something's redacted, and then it says Flynn stated his second trip to Russia after he left U.S. government service had received so much press attention that it was unbelievable, and that's in quotes. As background, Flynn explained that he was never paid directly by media entities. However, he had been a contributor to a variety of media entities, including Al Jazeera, Russia Today, Sky, and MSNBC. Flynn received a request from his Speakers Bureau, leading authorities, to speak about Middle East issues at the RT 10th anniversary reception in Moscow. Flynn was paid for the speech by, his speaking bureau, leading authorities. Flynn did not know from whom leading authorities received payment. Flynn met with Kislyak at the Russian ambassador's residence next to the University Club prior to his trip to Russia. The visit was a courtesy call to the ambassador prior to his trip, and Flynn took his son with him to this meeting. The meeting occurred in the mid-afternoon. In addition, Flynn received a DIA threat briefing prior to his travel. Something's redacted. Prior to the presidential inauguration, Flynn spoke to representatives in each of approximately 30 countries' governments. Flynn stated the only exception to that practice was Russia, in that Flynn had substantive conversations only with Kislyak and no other members of the government of Russia. Flynn's interest in Russia was as a common partner in the war on terror. Flynn does not know if Putin and Trump will get along, but it is Flynn's job to figure out paths to work with Russia to fight terrorism. Flynn named the primary threats to the U.S. as the 4+1: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and ISIS. Flynn stated if the U.S. could neutralize one of the four, or even better, leverage their cooperation fighting a common enemy, such as terrorism, that would be a success for U.S. national security. Sometime prior to Christmas 2016, the Russian ambassador was assassinated. Flynn called Kislyak the next day to say he was sorry and to reinforce that terrorism was our common problem. Flynn noted that it was a short call, and that was it. On Christmas Day, a Russian military plane crashed and killed all on board, to include what was the equivalent to the Russian USO. It was the same Russian choir that sang at the RT event. Flynn called Kislyak to pass his condolences, and his intent was to try to keep the relationship with Kislyak going. Flynn expanded that he has no particular affinity for Russia, but that Kislyak was his counterpart and maintained a trusted relationship within foreign governments is important. All right, I won't be able to finish this in the time allotted here, but this goes on. Just remember, this is a lie.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
There was no injury, by the way. We're talking about an inchoate crime. We're talking about something that didn't happen. There was no obstruction. There was no obstruction. They don't point to a single obstruction in their investigation.
Is that true?
It's hard for me to listen to that, and that's not the person that I knew. Of course there was obstruction. The clearest example, and that's the easiest to understand, is what Mueller says, that the president instructed Don McGahn to put a false statement in the file saying that he wasn't ordered to fire Bob Mueller. That is the completed crime of obstruction of justice right there, nothing more. And if Rudy is saying, which he knows not to be true, that if there's no underlying crime that is eventually charged, you can't obstruct justice during the investigation, that's just blatantly false. It happens all the time in white-collar cases where there's an investigation and perhaps the person doesn't eventually get charged with what the investigators are looking into, but along the way he tries to tamper with a witness or conduct to that effect, and that's a completed crime for which he can and does get prosecuted very often.
Okay,
and Rudy knows that.
And Rudy knows that. And that's Rudy Giuliani's former deputy. Okay, it's a guy named Jeff Harris, who actually told that to the Fox News audience, and was met with all kinds of pushback. That now, one of the things with regard to the obstruction case is this Michael Flynn 302. Now, I continue to read it, but what it is it's a lie. That's the problem. The problem is that Peter Strzok sat down with Michael Flynn in the White House and asked Michael Flynn questions about conversations that he had with the ambassador, with Kislyak, with trying to set up back channels, with talking about sanctions and a vote on Israeli settlements, believe it or not. And Michael Flynn denies to the FBI that there are text messages, that there is, there are memos, or that there are phone calls. And it's all a lie. Everything Michael Flynn told Peter Strzok was shown to be a lie. That's why Michael Flynn is due for sentencing, okay? And these are not process crimes. This is an obstruction of an investigation into an attack on the United States. And when Michael Flynn was giving this interview to the FBI, at that time, there was no criminal investigation. This was a counterintelligence investigation into Russia's meddling in our election, and Flynn chose to lie to the FBI. And that's why Emmett Sullivan, the judge who is in charge of the sentencing of Michael Flynn, said to Michael Flynn, you sold out your country. Because Michael Flynn was doing back channel deals, telling Russia about sanctions would be lifted, making arrangements for Russia and Saudi Arabia to have, nuclear, energy, things built together, and their hatred for, the Middle East crisis and their hatred for Iran. And I mean, all of this was going on, and he lied. He lied to the FBI. John Dowd sat on television. Dershowitz sat on television yesterday and lied to the American people. They represented that they were all in a joint defense agreement, like the mob, like it was a big RICO case, and they were all, sharing, That's not true. None of it is true. And every time people are exposed to the truth about what went on, they realize America was attacked. Oh, yeah, America was attacked. Who did it? The Russian military intelligence, the GRU. They attacked our elections. And guys like Flynn covered it up. Manafort actually gave them polling data repeatedly gave them polling data about Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Consistently supplied them with targeting information, real deep internal polling, expensive polling. I mean, the whole thing. And then you got the lawyers, after they are the administration, calling each other, going, we may have a national security issue if the president's implicated in this, but I just want you to know, Flynn, I wouldn't be surprised if he's cooperating with the government now, but I just want you to know, we'll pardon him. We'll pardon him if he doesn't go to the other side. His feelings towards Flynn, what I said about the president, his feeling towards Flynn, and that still remains. But in any event, thanks, pal. I mean, and then Donald Trump sat at a cemetery today in Normandy and said Mueller is a fool, and he lied and he misrepresented, what that was in that Dowd phone call. That's not true.
If he testifies still, before you said you didn't care, if Mueller testifies.
Let me tell you. He made such a fool out of himself the last time because what people don't report is the letter he had to do to straighten out his testimony, because his testimony was wrong. But Nancy Pelosi, I call her Nervous Nancy. Nancy Pelosi doesn't talk about it. Nancy Pelosi's a disaster, okay? She's a disaster. And let her do what she wants. You know what? I think they're in big trouble.
This is such projection. I can't even stand it. And to do it at the Normandy, commemoration amongst the head, it's just, there is no shame. He has no shame. He has no situational awareness. He has no idea what's important today. He has no idea how much trouble maybe he does know how much trouble he's in. I mean, he's been a liar his whole freaking life. Obviously, the man is an unindicted co-conspirator, and that case is almost nothing compared to this. That case is just about buying off women, buying their silence, and entering them into non-disclosure agreements ahead of the election so that he could, win. I mean, it's just so sick, and it's so wrong, and it's so bad. And today, I got to say, Nancy Pelosi, she's sort of taking everybody down the road of it's almost like she's telling the Trumpanzees to start, grieving for their for the lost presidency. It's almost like she's getting them down the road of, like the first stage of grief is denial. Like you can't even believe it. Then you progress through anger and finally acceptance. It's like she's trying to get them down this road, because today she said that she'd like to see the president in prison, not impeached. But you can't have those two things in isolation. You can't have a president that the Speaker of the House believes ought to be in prison, not impeached. So I'm guessing she's leaving these little breadcrumbs so that, Fox News, because she's a strategist. She's very strategic. And I think she's doing it so Fox News will play it. And they will trash her just like he did at the cemetery today. And he delayed the ceremony, the commemoration ceremony. He delayed it because he wasn't done talking to Lala Ingraham. He literally delayed the whole ceremony. They had to make an announcement at the gravesite at the cemetery today saying that something's come up, and so we're going to start about 15, 20 minutes late. The whole world was gathered there. I mean, it's just so sick. He made it about him. D-Day, he thinks the D stands for Donald. This is how we started the show. I mean, it's just so sick. But I think Nancy is trying to prepare Americans who still support this traitor, who still support this liar, who still support this obstructor, this cover-up artist, this hush money payer, this psycho that is our president, this small man who doesn't know anything about history and cares even less to learn it, therefore can't comprehend it, that this man is a criminal.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
This was not in many ways a close case. And so prosecutors, it doesn't really matter if you're Republican or Democratic. We're looking at the facts and the law here. And when you see someone committing an act that's clearly designed to interfere with law enforcement, finding out the truth of a matter, you're instantly thinking obstruction. And when you see it being done with the corrupt purpose to impede an investigation, prosecutors will sit down and this case will get indicted, including Rudy Giuliani's prosecutors, as we've just heard so forcefully.
Joyce, you know your way around the legal television world now. Is that fair to say?
Fair.
Yeah. Do you think that what we have here, running on Fox News and hearing from these colleagues of yours, Justice Department colleagues who did serve in Republican administrations, do you think it'll have an impact?
I think that this is both a smart but a disappointing strategy. It's smart because I suspect it will find its mark. That clip that you played from Justin Amash's town hall meeting was, I thought, very instructive, that there are some folks who have an exclusive diet of conservative news who haven't really been exposed to what's in the Mueller report. It's also disappointing, though, Ari, because we're a country that used to run on a shared set of facts. We could disagree about what they meant, but we agreed about those undeniable facts. And now we've been split into almost tribal nations where you have to hear it from your own people in order to believe it. So I'm delighted that this is happening, but I think we need leadership in this country that helps us return to shared narratives.
So that's the comment by the prosecutor Joyce Vance saying that, America is being given a steady diet on Fox News of absolute alternative universe views of what happened in this country and what continues to happen in this country, that the president of the United States is still obstructing justice. He is lying, and he has Rudy Giuliani lying, and he has, all kinds of people lying for him on Fox News, including himself, at the cemetery today in Normandy, which was just bizarro world, that a president, and literally the tweeting that went on from the cemetery was just mind-blowing. Jonathan Lemire, who writes for AP, he said D-Day ceremony in Normandy starting 30 minutes late. Veterans are waiting. Trump did Fox News interview after he arrived, slowing him from reaching the stage. But from Poole's vantage point, he appeared to be done and ready before Macron arrived, at which point ceremony began. And then there was another tweet by Hallie Jackson of MSNBC, and she said, French television cameras spotted President Trump sitting down with Fox's Laura Ingraham 14 minutes after the ceremony at Normandy was set to begin. Thousands of people waited. An announcement overhead came on declaring the program would be delayed until 11:15 a.m. The President of the United States literally held up the entire veterans community. I mean, these are 90-year-old men that are still alive. Like I said, we have about 456,000 World War II veterans still among us. We lose more and more every single year, while those 90-year-olds that were around, for the invasion at Normandy were at Normandy today for the 75th. And these guys are 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 96 years old. And the president kept them waiting so he could lie on Fox News about Robert Mueller being a fool and Nancy Pelosi being a disaster. It's mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing. I mean, the tone of this man he doesn't even get the solemnity of this occasion. He doesn't even understand what our fathers and grandfathers did on this day 75 years ago. That said, I have to tell you that now you have these prosecutors. You remember Robert De Niro, I retweeted it. We also played clips of it. There are 1,000 prosecutors in the United States. 1,000. That is an enormous number of prosecutors, federal prosecutors, signed a letter saying that the president obstructed justice after they read the Mueller report. That it was clear that there were at least 10 incidences. One of them is, Michael Flynn obstructing the counterintelligence investigation right from the get-go. That's just unbelievable. But that there were tons of episodes of obstruction, tons of crimes, and they continue to go on with these blanket denials, saying that, ordering private citizens not to testify because he's invoking executive privilege, which he cannot do because he allowed these private citizens to speak to Mueller in the first place. And in the second place, the Mueller report was made public without a claim of executive privilege over any of it. So it's just a moot point, right? But the president of the United States continues to issue these blanket orders to private citizens, ordering them not to testify, to defy congressional subpoenas. So the obstruction is ongoing. And Rudy Giuliani is sitting on Fox News along with other talking heads that are lying to you about Strzok and Page and these interviews that we now have, the actual interview notes. We actually have the phone call between Trump's lawyer, John Dowd, and Michael Flynn's lawyer, Robert Kellner, saying, hey, we'll pardon him. I mean, I understand if he wants to cooperate with the government, and I get you can't enter into a joint defense. I mean, you just have all these lies exposed now. And so what's happening is these prosecutors, these 1,000, and some of them served under Reagan, and some of them served under H.W., and some of them served under W. And so, it's some under Clinton and some under Obama, but they're prosecutors. They're not political animals. They're career prosecutors are going on Fox News to expose the lies. And I just think it's you know what my main focus was before we got the Mueller report and before we could piece together the whole story. It was always just so weird to me that Rudy Giuliani himself, and you wonder, like, what is Dershowitz, what is Dershowitz' interest that he's protecting when he goes on Fox and lies for the president? I know what popped into your mind if you're an advanced, political, person. If you read, I know what popped into your head. I suspect the same thing is what's motivating Dershowitz to lie for the president. The Lolita Express, whatever. I'm just saying it popped into my head, okay? I'm not saying I have any evidence or proof or anything like that, because I don't. But what would make Rudy Giuliani do this? And I've always suspected that it starts at the beginning. When Rudy Giuliani first went on Fox News and said there was an October surprise, we're not done yet, because they were losing. They were losing. But he said there was this October surprise, and you won't believe it, and it's going to change polling data. It's going to change everything. That was something that happened in the New York field office of the FBI. That was the Anthony Weiner, believe it or not. This goes back to that. Anthony Weiner had his computer taken by the New York field office of the FBI because he was tweeting. He was tweeting to 15-year-old girls and sending pictures. It was gross. And they took his computer and they sat on that computer for about 3 weeks. And then just before the election, they turned it over without doing real forensics on it to James Comey. Threw their hands up in the air and said, okay, here's Weiner's computer. Guess what's on there? There's some emails on there from Hillary Clinton to Huma Abedin, Anthony Weiner's wife. And those emails we don't think you've seen, so you have to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Now Comey is like, I don't know, 6 days, 10 days before the election, in possession of a computer that the New York field office says has new emails that he had not seen after he closed the email investigation into Hillary Clinton's carelessness about using her own email address instead of a gov address, right? And they turn it over to Comey, who now has to do all the forensics on it and find out what are these emails. So Comey sends a letter to Congress. He didn't do a press conference. A lot of people misremember this. He did send a letter to Congress, though, saying that he's now in possession of Anthony Weiner's computer and there are emails from Hillary to Huma, and he has to do the forensics on it. New York just gave it to him, and they sat on it for 3 weeks. They do the forensics much quicker than they thought because they were all duplicates, and that was an easy thing to identify. And then he closes the investigation again, but the election is now like the next day, or you know, it was like the Sunday before the Tuesday. And people think that there's more to the Hillary email investigation, and Trump is screaming it on the... I swear to God, I think Rudy and James Kallstrom knew this.